I watched the first 3 episodes of A Sign of Affection, and it feels like the first pure romance I've watched in years that didn't disappoint. I know that's a contentious point. My entire channel is built on talking about romance stories, but when it comes to Red Hot Go, and even shows I've watched outside of it, I find any romance that doesn't have comedy as well tends to fall flat for me. So how does A Sign of Affection grab my attention and make me want to keep watching? It comes down to these points. It avoids the more unsavory tropes of the genre. It gives me a glimpse into what life is like for someone with a different perspective. The protagonist and male lead have some of the strongest characterization I've seen in a while, and it sets up a compelling main theme. Let's start with that first point. You should all know by now that I hate fan service in anime. I wouldn't go so far as to say that it could never be done well, but I will go as far as to say that I have never seen it done well. Putting aside the more disturbing elements of fan service, there's some annoyance that comes with the monotonous repetition of a few tropes. If I were to tell you that A Sign of Affection starts with our female protagonist having an issue on a public train with a man she doesn't know, anyone with general anime knowledge is going to make a very specific assumption about that situation. So imagine my delight when the issue is that a foreigner is trying to ask her for directions, and not the other issue that even great romance anime can't help but indulging in. This is the closest thing A Sign of Affection has in terms of fan service, and the fact that it's just a bit of lamp shading is downright refreshing. It even avoids romance downfalls that are less problematic and more tedious. For starters, this is a story taking place among adults. The protagonist, Yuki, is a 19-year-old college student. Sure, college age is still basically a baby to this old man, but at least I get a break from stories about high school students. And this greater age amounts to greater maturity in our characters. When Yuki first meets Itsuomi, she comes to the realization almost immediately that she has a crush on him and that she wants to do something about it. That is such a breath of fresh air compared to the usual setup for these kinds of stories. Even the nervousness she feels around Itsuomi is less annoying when she knows exactly where these nerves are coming from. Watching her get anxious over texting someone that she denies having a crush on would have been infuriating. But watching her get anxious over texting someone she knows she has a crush on is just plain relatable. That's not to say A Sign of Affection is without overused tropes and cliches. One aspect of the show I'm more cautiously optimistic for is Oshi, the childhood friend who's an edgy, brooding misery guts with a secret heart of gold and an incel-like possessiveness over Yuki. I know that incel is a strong term, but the way he insists that Yuki should not be in college due to her disability, the way he never has anything kind to say to her, the way he bemoans her growing friendship with Itsuomi in an unnecessarily hostile way, it all leaves a bad taste in the mouth. I say cautiously optimistic because for reasons I'll get into later, the show looks as though it's preparing to dress him down for this behaviour. And if that's the way we're going, I am all in. There's also potentially some love triangle stuff with one of Itsuomi's friends, but it's too early to get worried about what might be going on there, especially when I'm too busy learning about the unique perspective of the show's protagonist. Yuki is deaf. As someone who is not deaf nor knows anyone else who is, I've never really put any thought into what that must be like. A Sign of Affection explores the lived experience of their deaf protagonist in 2 ways. Firstly, we get to see the little day-to-day tidbits, like tools that the audibly impaired might make use of, and some of the challenges that come up in everyday life. I was baffled when I saw that Yuki takes notes in class by reading over the shoulder of her friend. That's nuts! I thought for sure that any college worth their salt would have amenities for people with disabilities like this. Another obvious day-to-day aspect is sign language. Yuki doesn't just use this to communicate with other characters, she can even decipher things about them by how they perform that sign language. For instance, she knows that Oshi is kinder than he lets on because of how softly his fingertips move when he signs with her. The other way A Sign of Affection explores the deaf experience is through the emotional issues that can arise. Whenever Yuki meets someone new with a friend, despite not being able to hear them, she can always tell she's being talked about. usually when the aforementioned someone new is having her circumstances explained to them. This was a bit of a confronting moment in the show. How would I deal with being talked about in a way I could not comprehend? Even if the conversation was ultimately for my benefit, I can imagine the experience would be uncomfortable. But Yuki rolls with the punches and takes the awkwardness like a champion, because she is one of the best written female protagonists I've seen since Kaguya from Love is War. And that's not even considering what her unique perspective brings to the table. As mentioned before, she's attuned to her emotions. While most female protagonists in her position would deny their romantic interest until the season finale, Yuki is able to admit almost immediately that she is interested in Itsuomi. She has insecurities about how others perceive her, going so far as to wonder whether Itsuomi considers her more of a fascinating creature than a human being, but these insecurities are never dwelled on. She'll have a moment where she's self-conscious and then it will pass. And possibly my favourite part about Yuki is that she wears her heart on her sleeve. When she's excited, you'll know it. Not through her internal monologue, but through her bombastic reactions. It would have been easy to make Yuki a stereotypical quiet character. I wouldn't have even batted an eye if that's the direction they went. But instead we get these occasional outbursts of excited energy, and I love it. Itsuomi is no slouch either. While he can veer dangerously close into the stoic, emotionless archetype that I usually rail against, he has just enough going for him to escape that void. The fact that he can speak so many languages fluently would have been unbelievable if I didn't know someone like that in real life. While the trope of guy does something to girl that flusters her and doesn't realise is a common one, most instances of him doing this come from a place of empathy rather than a lack of social intelligence. Like the way he will tilt Yuki's head up so that she will see him talking to her. That empathy eventually inspires him to begin learning signs, which I hope will be a major plot point throughout the rest of the show. But so far I've just described a couple of characters. Good characters, but the strength of the first 3 episodes is how their dynamic imbues the show with a compelling theme. Yuki spent most of her formative years in a small school with single-digit classroom populations. There's nothing inherently wrong with this, you gotta do what you gotta do to get an appropriate education. However, this experience has left her feeling a little boxed in. Like there's more to the world than she has experienced for herself, and she has a desire to experience those things. Itsuomi has spent his life travelling, visiting random countries seemingly on a whim. He has had the kind of experiences that Yuki longs to have for herself. But there's more. Yuki to Itsuomi is someone with a whole new perspective on life, an outlook he likely hasn't found anything close to despite all his travels. When he wants to know how she sees the world, he doesn't just ask to be taught sign language, but he asks Yuki to share her perspective. He is as fascinated in her experiences as she is in his. Both leads ultimately want the same thing: discovery. They both want to broaden their understanding of the world, and they have found the best possible person to help them achieve that goal. But that's not all. A Sign of Affection has an antithesis to the protagonist's desire for discovery. A thematic antagonist, if you will. No prizes for guessing, it's obviously Oshi. See, while Yuki wants to explore herself and learn about the world around her, Oshi is upset with her for leaving the safety of her pre-existing circle. "Why the heck do you have to come to college?" he asks her on one occasion. While this attitude is hinted to come from a place of misguided concern, it still represents a stark contrast to what Yuki hopes to achieve. She wants to explore, Oshi would rather she stay at home. I don't know where this is going. My trope recognition tells me that she will face something too intense at one point and return to what is comfortable until Oshi realizes he was wrong and encourages her to get back out there. I could see a scenario in which Oshi's concern is just thinly veiled jealousy that she's expanding her circle, thus making it less likely that she will fall in love with him. Something is going to give eventually, and best case scenario is that he either chills the hell out or gets cut off altogether. But the fact that it could go just about anywhere is another hook that A Sign of Affection has sunk into me. To conclude, the show has great characters, some insight into a different lived experience, an amazing overarching theme, and a little spice in the form of an antithesis to that theme. It should be no surprise that from ice cold to red hot, I give A Sign of Affection a rating of red hot. I cannot wait to see what comes next. I'd like to thank my patrons: Lars Espen, Data52, Gemen5, Pixcalibur, Temka, Jeremy Pashik, Fireclaw, Swiss Cage, Gerald, Dustin Rubin, The Blue Crystal 770, Garen, and Harry Goldmouth. Thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you next time.